Leadership is the keynote topic for most ministers' conferences and the subject of thousands of Christian books and articles. How can I shape and share vision? How do we lead for growth? Today's conversation will challenge our biases about leadership and reflect on Jesus' model of leadership. Tammy Preston was the founding pastor of an intergenerational faith community in Australia for 18 years, and she is a founding member of Intergenerate Australia New Zealand. She's currently doing her PhD in intergenerational ministry at Cardiff University in Wales. Our conversation explores the different models and styles of leadership that help us lead effective intergenerational church. If your church is on a journey exploring intergenerational ministry, she has some helpful reflections about how we create belonging, hear everyone's voice, and how we flip the classroom. But if you've never really considered intergenerational ministry, don't skip on. If you're leading church, her questions and provocations are helpful in challenging the default narratives we hear about leadership and will lead us to look more like Jesus as we lead. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Hello, Tammy. Welcome to the Roots for Churches podcast. It's really great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, Tammy, you've got a wonderful accent, and people will soon discover that you are from a beautiful land of Australia, and that you've been involved in intergenerational ministry for many years. Can you tell me a bit of your journey with intergenerational ministry? How did you come to it as an idea? What makes you passionate about it?
Yes, well, you are correct. I come from the land down under, and Sydney, Wollongong-ish, Sydney, born and bred. So yes, that's where I reside. I've been in children's ministry, family children's ministry, since I was 18 years old. So that's kind of, close to certainly over 30 years or so. And about 22 years ago, it's funny, when you asked me that question, I was thinking about it. To be quite honest, I was a children's pastor and I loved being with my kids, my own kids. And the teacher in me, really believed in interaction and learning best in a way with kids that was discovery. And so I was doing that with my kids, but I also really enjoyed the fact that I got to do life with my own kids. Then they started to kind of go into the other classes. And I thought, hang on here, I really want to be with my kids. So there's probably a bit of a selfish reason where I started to think, well, why can't we do this together? And so the more and more that I asked that question and looked into it, the more and more I realized, well, actually we can. And then I looked at it from a biblical perspective and I thought, well, actually, that's kind of the model that I think is, there's a lot to say for that in terms of how Jesus did life with his disciples and how he talked about what we should look like as community. So it really did start from my own desires to want to do life with my own kids. And then how could I help families be the same? And then, so even with the kids focus, it then really very quickly became, this is not just the best way kids grow and get discipled. This is actually the way we all get discipled really well. So that's my kind of process, I suppose, that got me there.
And I mean, I would agree with that all of us learn better, discovery, discussion, really engaging. The more engaged we are, the more we learn. But I would say intergenerational still feels quite countercultural to the way most church is done. It feels most churches, usually a man at the front, us people sitting in rows and listening, lots of listening. And our participation is singing or passing an offering bowl.
That's right.
That's the limit of the interaction. And part of that is that architecture, is it tradition? But I think there's also something in our minds of this is the way we think church should be. And it constantly surprises me that education has moved on decades and decades ago from that model, but the church still holds on to it. And even if our children's groups are more interactive and participative, Sunday morning service is still very, something out of the 1800s. And it depends on your congregation, but even if you're in a charismatic church, the style looks more like a telly set, but it's still somebody at the front talking like that. So as somebody who's been doing intergenerational for a while, can you talk me through why do we get so stuck? Like, why is this so pervasive when we can see we've got like research that shows that this is good, this is better? Why is the church at large quite resistant to intergenerational, I would say?
Well, I mean, I think that that opens up a number of conversations, and I think that one of the things we're not really good at as people generally is change. And but then that's ironic because of course, life changes all the time and people embrace so many changes in the world. But I think that obviously I could go down a whole lot of rabbit holes here, but those that lead have a lot, I don't even want to use the word power or control, but it's important to them in terms of their role. So I think that there's an element where they it affects what they think is their leadership role. But I also think it comes also from the people, because one of the things that someone said to me that made me really think about it, when you come to Jesus, or when Jesus changes your life, and when something like that happens, it's so profound. There's things that become anchors for you that are really important. And so if you think about those that are largely leading our churches today, and that would be largely the boomer generation, what was so powerful when they became Christians becomes the anchor for them to hold on to. And so that is often the hymns and the safety of the church service and the seat that I feel comfortable in, and the known that there's so much out there in the world that's changing, and this is one place that I can feel doesn't change, because we all say, God is never changing, or he is, always was, always is, and always will be. So I think there's an element of that we hold on to that becomes sacred to us, and that sacred piece is the heart connection. And often that can be, certainly connected to, which is why we hear the good old days, or, or when, these things were important to me. I think some of that's happening within our churches, but I do think it comes down to leadership, because leadership has, not that I think it's a be all and end all, because I think that we're made as a family, but there's definitely an element where how we lead and how we bring about change, or how we create the environments for people to experience community. We do have we as leaders do have a lot of power in that way too. And I'd say that in the word, I think that the word power is often used in a bad way, but I think it can be a really good power of influence and a power of freedom and empowerment, safety and all those things. And I think that's part of it. It's not the whole story. It's a very complex story as to why we've got caught in some things. Because as soon as you start to look at the church as a whole, the things we are holding on to aren't that old in history, in terms of church history. So what we think is church is a really good thing to keep holding lightly, and coming back to God's word and going, okay, what did Jesus command or call us to do and be, and how's that need to be reflected today? Very interesting question.
It is. I mean, and Jesus didn't really say you should meet like this on a Sunday at this time and in this size group. He didn't give us any of that.
No,
he was practicing Jewish tradition. So he went to the synagogue.
That's right.
But he didn't say you guys should be Jewish and do it like this. And then the early church did lots of things. So in terms of sort of how I feel like we canonize our version of church depending on which denomination you're in. But like all of that is quite subjective, and tradition and extrapolation from New Testament scriptures, and sort of looking at Old Testament and thinking, how could we sort of take some of the good things out of this? So yeah, again, our idea of church is constructed, and often I think very cultural. I remember somebody telling me once that the way churches are governed are often based on the political system at the time when that denomination was founded. So the Church of England has bishops, which is very much like the House of Lords. and it looks
Yes.
like a hierarchy, which is a bit like the monarchy. The Baptists, they go for democracy, because that Baptist kind of came around American democracy. That's one of the biggest, and so it's this, we're all going to vote. So it's fascinating. Like, you start thinking, oh yeah, okay, when did my denomination really get started? And what was the government of my nation like at that time? Oh, that's interesting that we've modeled our church on that. It's not specifically biblical, is it? And I'm sure there's gaps, and somebody could point holes in my argument, but I do just think sometimes we make things more sacred than they really are. They're just an organizational thing. So I guess what I want to come to is, you've done a PhD in intergenerational ministry, but specifically around leadership. Now, can you help me unpack? I don't actually know what the title is, but this whole concept of leadership, that's what we want to talk about today. So tell us about your research and your PhD.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. So when you said specifically around leadership, when you start a PhD, or when you start like a thought, or what you think you're going to study, 4 years later, you find yourself in a different space. And I think that's part of the journey of it. And you have to be open to that. So I don't think, I definitely wasn't thinking that leadership would be one of the biggest things that came out of the findings of my study. So that was one of those unanticipated, interesting things, because I really wanted to, again, look at where I had been leading this intergenerational faith community for over 10 years, and was kind of feeling weird because we were just so countercultural, and I got to the point where I'm thinking, are we just really weird, or is there anyone else out there doing anything like it? And that was when, colleagues like Dave Sinos and Mark Griffiths and Holly Allen said, you really need to write down what it is that you've been doing, but also go and go to the deeper research and find others that have been doing it, and see how we can help make this transition from those very, siloed traditional thinking more to where you've landed, which people would say was the other extreme of the pond. In that journey, I discovered that leadership was quite a key piece into that. So it started as, how do you help transition from silo to more kind of holistic? And there's certainly a lot of that. So there's a lot of change process, and there's a lot of what does it look like, and what are the environments, and there's lots of wonderful things that came out of it. And so now it's the official title is now a study of intergenerational Christian communities in Australia and New Zealand, because I was doing it during COVID, and while I intended to go to England and the US, as well as these two countries, to have 4 perspectives of the Western side, sort of whole, I suppose, institutional churches, or I get in trouble using that word, but traditional, and looking at those that were kind of on the journey and moving more towards more holistic connections. But I was grounded through COVID. It could only stay in Australia and New Zealand. So it is a study of 14 churches across Australia and New Zealand. And yet the times when I have spent time in the UK and in the USA talking to churches that are still similar on the journey, the same kind of things keep popping up. So yeah, one of the things that was interesting and unanticipated was that I started to notice that those leaders that were leading these communities led very differently to what I would say, as someone who went through Bible college, not only learnt what it means to be in ministry, but, what are the most important things? Make sure you can do a 3-point sermon, make sure, you do the pastoral care, make sure that, so it was kind of like, okay, when I sit and listen to these guys, and when I watch guys and girls, and when I watch and observe this community, there's something very different in the way that these people lead. And it was really nice for me because, again, I was feeling very weird when I went to conferences and thought, I don't really lead like that. I'm not really interested in how many people are coming to church and what your offering's about, but I'm actually more interested in, are people growing, and is there real joy in being together, and is there a way to empower those that we gather together in their gifts, and find that actually really brings beautiful life to each other and to the body. So these leaders were certainly leading in a different way. And that became very interesting to me.
So can we unpack a little bit of the terminology just so that everybody's on the same page? So you're using some phrases somewhat interchangeably, but you've talked about siloed church or traditional or institutional. I'm understanding that as churches that would have a preference to have like the children in one group, the youth in another group. If you've got lots of children, that you separate them by age, and then you might have an adult Bible study, midweek Bible study, but that's all adults. So everybody's in age groups, and you might come together on a Sunday morning all together for some of the service before the children go out, or it might be that the Sunday service is predominantly geared at adults. It's the traditional method is like there's one or two leaders and maybe some musicians that are leading things from the front of a room where there's a stage, maybe it's an altar, but everybody else is facing that direction, listening to one or three, four leaders. So we're calling that siloed because they're all in different silos. Is that, or am I?
Good. So I think I use it all interchangeably because I'm very aware of putting people in boxes, and I think we do it too easily. When I use the word silo, I'm saying that it looks differently in different places, but often what it means is people are separated, and whether it be age or whether it be, likes or dislikes or passions, or it can be a few things, whether it can be education, whether it can be culture. But definitely in the sense that we in the last 100 years have gone down a very strong educational focus where to be specialised is to make sure you've got a 3 to 5 year old's room and a 5 to 8 year old's room and a 9 to 12 year old's room, and the youth are somewhere else, and then we have the men are somewhere else in a men's shed, and the women are doing CWF, which is Christian Women Fellowship, and there's really lovely things about that. But we've done that to the exclusion of being together as a family. And there's very practical things about it because all of a sudden when you've got a very high focus on education, and I would say within the church we've got a very high focus on teaching. And again, Jesus was a great teacher, but it was, to me, I think that's where the advantage that we get as workers people who have been with children, is that you're reminded constantly that we might want to teach them something, but we actually need to take them as a whole person. And so their emotions and their physicality and their intellect and their spiritual, we're all one person. So we've kind of taken the brain and said, okay, adults can sit here for 40 minutes and listen to a sermon, and that's okay because we're teaching them something about God. But actually we're kind of missing all the different other ways we learn. And actually, as you said, education has kind of jumped into this. So I think that definitely the siloed piece is how do we kind of separate things up rather than how do we find ways that we can actually be together. I think the traditional side, when I talked about institutional or traditional, I'm really talking about the kind of things that you're suggesting, which is probably what people think when they hear the word church. I suppose you can hear me pensing my words because I don't want people to feel like I'm being judgmental, but I go, actually, why do we do this? I'm a what can this become girl. So, I drove everyone mad even as a child in school. So where do those dynamic learners, they usually get shut down pretty quickly. And so it's the same thing in the church. It's like you've got all the creative arts and you've got all the practical people, and we've kind of siloed them off to say, well, if you're practical, you can go and be in the service or the missions team. And if you're intellectual, you can go and do a Bible study or do this. But actually, we should be doing all of those things because we're integrated people. So we've got a little bit of everything. So even in the most, so when I say isolated, I think that even in a church that everyone comes together for 15 minutes at the beginning for the children's segment, and then they leave and we say, yay, we're a family church. I think we're just as isolated there as we are in other spaces because it's actually got to start with a heart piece. that it's not about the structures, it's about people. It's not about programs, it's about relationships. It's not about, that's it. So I think that what I learned, I went into going to these churches thinking I would see exactly what we do, which is much more kind of fluid in a sense. But what I saw was lots of different kinds of structures. But what I saw was deeper than that, was there was a heart piece that wanted to be family and together. So even in some of the structures that might seem traditional, there was still beautiful community happening because people leaders were leading in that way, and people had a heart for that. So I might sound like I'm contradicting myself, but what I'm saying is I'm not just saying siloed is these traditions and intergenerational is not, because I actually think it's more, it has to start with our heart. It has to start with how we lead. It has to start how we gather, and it also has to start with our heart. If our heart is to see people of all ages and to engage with them, we'll find a way, even in some of the most traditional structures.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm reflecting that I think it's probably like a Western mindset thing. And again, it's how we think about education. And I think we have over-equated discipleship or spiritual formation with education.
Absolutely.
Because as you're saying, like, it's not just knowledge, and it's not just being able to do various practices like pray or, I don't know, be baptized, take communion. It's all of these things. It's how we do relationships. It's how we serve. It's how we love. It's how we make things right when we screw it up, because we will a lot.
Exactly.
So all of that, not just how well do I know the Bible, but the way that the Western mind does this. We do this with medicine. We do this with science. We take things and we make them as small and as sort of homogeneous as possible so that we can kind of drill down and fully understand that bit. But somehow, I mean, in medicine, you like homeopathy or the whole person, you're like, hello, there's a whole person connected, not just this wound over here. And that wound is probably affecting the whole person. So how do we not just treat a particular symptom, not just disciple a particular bit of a person's brain, but how do we get the whole person? So I think a lot of our discipleship, our formation, as you say, is based on talking to people's brains. And I'm not underestimating how important that is, because that's, that's steering the whole ship, as it were. But it does feel very disembodied. It does feel a bit cerebral sometimes.
It's good.
Or in some church traditions, it feels like what we disciple is people's emotions and maybe disengage with the brains. But again, it's that compartmentalized bit. And then I mean, if you follow church podcasts, if you follow church conferences, churches are obsessed with leadership. Like that is one of the big things. How did Paul lead? How did Jesus lead? How can we lead?
Exactly.
And so what you're coming to with your research is, well, there's a different style of leadership. So I wonder if, before we kind of go into what the most helpful for intergenerational ministry, that form of leadership, can you just give us a few types of leadership that are prevalent in the church, so we can kind of go, okay, that's where I sit, or that's what I'm familiar with, and then we'll recognize the differences in what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. There is so much about leadership, and this is the hard thing, is we can get caught up in it all, and there are, you don't have to Google too fast to find 10 these type of leaders and 8 these type of leaders. So, I mean, there's definitely, from a biblical perspective, you've got your visionary leaders who are goal orientated, and I mean, I grew up in church growth movement, so I grew up under a very visionary leader who was charismatic, and he has the vision, and we just follow along. So that would be, very still prevalent today. And then there's very administrative, like task-orientated leaders that, know how to make sure that everyone's got their, whether they call them administrators or whether they call them, there's lots of different names they call them. And I mean, again, these are all different giftings. There's no doubt about it. There's that shepherd kind of concept. I'm a shepherd, and so I'm more people-orientated, and I want to make sure that everyone is loved and cared for and feels a part of the flock, So you can hear all those kind of things that people people talk about. And I don't know whether, and I think that we're all gifted in different ways. And you can go from very kind of authoritarian to very, laissez-faire and, transactional kind of, we'll just see how things go, or transformation. So there's lots of things that get thrown around, of course. But you said something that I just want to sort of drill into. You said we're looking for the way Jesus led, or Paul led, and, how do we be like them? Which, seriously, that's actually what we're called to do, to be like Jesus. So I suppose what interests me is, if we're all so keen to be more like Jesus, then I'm not quite sure how we've got all these other things that have kind of got us distracted, because I think Jesus' leadership is pretty clearly laid out. And I think that that's a beautiful goal for us all to have. So, I just want to keep coming back to how Jesus led, to what he did with the 12 that he followed, that he chose, and that he walked very clearly with, and the others around him, other than the 12 men, I believe, was quite significant as well. And the choices he made in those 3 years of leading are very interesting. I mean, he could have, honestly, he could have drawn thousands every day. He could have had the biggest temple church, that
mega church
anyone had. He could have had the mega church. So why didn't he do that? That, I find, says a lot about Jesus and what he modeled, and what he not only had to say to the Pharisees regularly, but also basically just the way he lived his life. So we can talk about all these different types of leaders, and we see them in all different ways. And we certainly, you've alluded to the Western world and how we follow the Western, whatever it is that the culture is. And we definitely see that business model has come through in the church growth movement, and is still very prevalent in a lot of mega churches, because once you get to lots of people, you get to a point where there needs to be some kind of organization. I just find it interesting that Jesus walked away from the crowds a lot because his heart was discipleship. So I think that's where, to me, they're the conversations I'm interested in having, is what kind of, not only what kind of leader he was, but how, and I'll often put in this process just some of the things, some of the key words that came up, that these leaders kind of were leading in these churches, but also the I suppose the opposite word. And I'll have them kind of on the table, on the ground, and we talk about where we would like to be on that scale. We talk about where Jesus was on that scale, and it's a very fascinating conversation with leaders about what kind of leader do we want to be, and how does that help.
So what are the two ends of the spectrum?
So we've got, all right, let me just grab them here so I don't get them. So I've just picked up on 7, I think it's 7 words. So I've got talking to versus walking alongside. So the leaders that, so there's, how do we walk along? We walk with each other, or how do we talk to? So you've got these two extremes in a sense. And so that's a really interesting one. Then I've got acceptance and being inclusive. And on the other end of the spectrum, I've got winning the argument. So I'm right. This is what it is. Everyone, let's just go this way. Does that sound like some leaders that you know of in the world today?
Yeah.
And then I've got like that sense of being intimate and vulnerable versus actually I'm just totally isolated and no one really knows me, and I'll just stay to hang out to myself. Then we've got, how do we are we leaders that are mutually kind of not only working together but also working with each other, or is it actually my way or the highway? You've heard that one before. So they're the two opposing. There's those that are very collaborative, and the way that they lead is about how do we empower and collaborate with each other, or actually I just do this on my own. individual is the word. And then I think that's the main ones. Yeah, that's all of them. And so I just sort of put them down, and we start to kind of talk about what kind of leaders it look like if we're at one side or if we're on the other side, and when did Jesus know how to weave from, the different parts to be able to do what he did.
He doesn't sit on one of them, does he, the whole time? He does confront. There are times when he tells the Pharisees, you're wrong. He does win some arguments. So it's tempting to go, all the nicer ones, all the more collaborative ones are right. Jesus meek and mild. He does, I think that's the point, is that there are moments, there is truth and grace. There is confrontation and there is relationship. There is acceptance and challenge. So it isn't just pick one side. This is the dance of leadership, isn't it? You can't just go, I will always collaborate and accept whatever, because you wouldn't do anything.
And I think that's been a really great conversation, because even though I think we all come to an agreement that if we're going to err on one, we're going to err towards the side of, how do we kind of work with others. But that also, because of the relationship is so rich there, it actually allows us to then, there are times when we need to say, actually, this is where we're going. There are times in relationship that we say, this is what I need to win this argument per se, but I win it in a way like Jesus did that was always really entrenched in relationship. And then other times it was just, he knew who he needed to speak to call certain things out. So that was really what I found with these leaders who wanted to be on that side of collaboration and being able to, be vulnerable and to being able to work with others. Also realized that there were times if it was just all about collaboration, then sometimes things never get done. And if it was all about, just kind of going, well, we'll just all walk along beside each other. But there was an element where, they were often saying, look, I will always err that side because it's about relationship. But I know that there are times when I'm called to lead in a strong way. So these leaders that were leading well, not only were gifted and strong in their leadership, but it actually was rooted deeply in genuine relationships and inclusiveness and collaboration and godly sense. And then to just know that communication both ways and listening and, was all a very key part of trust. And so, there were some really interesting things that came through, but it did mean there was enough trust, enough relationship to say, well, actually, sometimes I can come with an idea, but am I open to the fact that someone else may actually have another solution that may work better, and that's okay, that it's not actually about me needing to always be in control and it always being my way, but actually being able to hold that vision and know that God's actually, the body of Christ, can work and others can be a part of that process as well. That it's just become a really interesting conversation. And just, you can see those leaders even that feel really comfortable about having open conversations. And then you see those leaders who all of a sudden go to the back of the room with their arms crossed and they just stand and watch, because they just say, well, if you're not going to do it the way I like it, then I actually don't want to play. And it's really interesting to watch the dynamics of opening that up amongst a bunch of leaders.
And I wonder if, I'm just thinking about leadership training, and you get a lot of clarifying your vision, clarifying your mission statement. I've been through so many church leader things on that sort of thing. Lots of books, Willow Creek leadership, that kind of stuff. It's all vision. It's as you say, it's the church growth model. It's towards, and they're good things that we're going after, but how do you kind of get everybody on board with this vision? And then, and I think in the article you wrote for Roots, you called it ladder leadership, of or bridge leadership. How do we get all these people from here up to over here, which is better? And the vision, the leader has the vision of where we're going to build the bridge to, or where we're going to put the ladder up to. And my goal as the leader is to kind of get everybody across. And there's a lot of training about that, of how do you communicate, how do you clarify your vision, how do you empower people, how do you take people on board. the other form of leadership, and I think in your article you call it circle leadership, I just haven't heard much training about that. Now, a little bit like community organizing, maybe listening training, but they don't often call it leadership, interestingly. So that the training about that style of leadership is not called leadership training. It's called something else. Therefore, we think of it as soft skills, or we think of it as relational skills, or we think of it as how to build collaboration. But I think what you're getting at is that this is a form of leadership that isn't often called leadership, or maybe not in the mainstream, but it is a really important skill. So can you, I mean, when I think of that, I think of, and maybe this is very caricature, but I think of like a tribal leader who's trying to get their whole tribe to do something. Or I think of more First Peoples, or I don't know, a community group where there really isn't a leader and you're trying to navigate, and it feels like there's a whole bunch of different rules to play that aren't there in our normal siloed traditional churches. So yeah, I'm interested, like, where does this model of leadership come from? What are the sort of ground rules, if there were, or what are the values of that kind of leadership that make it work well?
Yeah, okay. So, and it's interesting again how this came about in the conversations, because I didn't really explain it. But so part of my thesis was to interview 114 people across 14 communities, all the different generations. So that would be every generation had their voice in that space. One of the questions, I mean, there was 17 questions, so it's very, very, there's so much data and it's been amazing. But one of the things that came up was how they felt like they belonged and what made them feel like they belonged. And 98% of people, well, it was the majority of people, but certainly 98% talked about in terms of 7 different things. And one of the things that came up pretty strongly was everyone had to feel like they had a voice and they were listened to and they had a place to share and to bring for their voice to be heard. So that kind of made me start to delve into what does that look like. And then and this is everyone's voice. This is a 10-year-old and the 95-year-old and the 40 and the 50. Everyone was saying the same thing. And so again, that I pushed into, well, that requires a very different environment for everyone to have a voice, and the other pieces were for them to feel like they had a role to play, that they felt like family, they felt like they were loved, they were part of. So all these things came up very strongly. And so when I asked them what did that look like, that's when the stories came out about how they met, how they learned, how they worshipped, how they served. And it just kept coming up that it was more about, not so much about, following the leader's vision or, the hierarchy pieces, but actually more of a flat piece where it was about relationship and family, and that while there is someone who is the head, that there was definitely this collaboration piece that allowed people to have a voice and to lead this process together and see where we went together as a family. Now, that's how a lot of these communities were functioning, and were finding that they felt very much like they belonged. They felt like they were growing, they were learning, they were connecting, they loved it. They felt like they were the family of God together. And so one of the things that, and I think this answers your question, even to the point where you first started and said, what are some of the reasons why we get stuck in these ways? I think we've got stuck in doing what we do because we have a mindset that is very hierarchical, that is very position orientated, that is the minister does this, the people do this, the elders do this, and that's this kind of, whether this is a Western visual of the ladder or this bridge that we have to cross. And that actually made me think that I think that's part of the problem. Unless we actually unlearn, deconstruct, kind of pull some stuff apart and then relearn a different way of functioning together, we are not going to be able to make the changes that are required for, well, all ages to be together, let alone all cultures to be together, or actually people who think differently to be together, or et cetera, and even to really understand what it means to be family together. So that's where for me I started to realize those that are in intergenerational experiences, or if those are kind of working in community, then it's a much more circle approach on pretty much everything they do, because whether that means actually meeting, when they gather together, they're often around tables, they're often around food, they're often around more formal informal relationship stuff. And it was about everyone's voice. It was about some kind of interactive piece. It was some kind of everyone bringing their gifts. It just was more of a towards each other. And when you're in a circle, you can't help it. Everyone is towards each other. And it's a very physical change to being sitting in a pew and seeing someone's back of the head and hearing one voice. So I just really felt like that posture is the beginning of changing the way we gather, and the way we lead has to reflect that.
Yeah, it's really good. So the question that springs to mind is, does size matter in this? Because I've got a little intergenerational group that meets around my house, and we fit around our dining table. And to be fair, we have a big dining table that would seat 12. But for a lot of people to sit in a circle, churches are not designed with everybody sitting in a circle. And churches have 40, 50, 80, hundreds and hundreds of people. Once you get to a certain size, does circle leadership really struggle because you're struggling to actually connect with other people? Does this only work in small churches or small groups? Or is there a way to scale this kind of circle leadership?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in some ways, I know you're asking me a question that you're already kind of alluding the answer to.
I'm not really sure.
Well, I think that this is a hard question, and this is the one I get into trouble with all the time. And again, I'll just keep coming back to Jesus. Jesus could have been in a crowd, or he actually chose to disciple 12 people / probably about 30 and do life with. And there's a part of me that wants to say, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. I do think when you're actually serious about discipleship, and when you're actually serious about, and this is what my studies came up with, the belonging is they need to feel known, they have deep friendships, their voice matters, they feel like they're seen, they feel like they've got something. When you start to think about wanting people to feel like they truly belong, then I'm sitting in a pew with 1,000 other people, hearing a monological sermon, walking out saying hello to a couple of people, and walking away after an hour on a Sunday morning. I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's discipleship.
No.
I think that's it's not belonging. It's a celebration, and we all love a celebration to feel like we're part of a bigger kingdom. But the trouble is that has become what people think church is, and it's just a very small part of it. And I'm not even sure if within with our resources that are limited, with our time that's limited, with the way that we've kind of, not that I'd like to be counterculture and all that again, but that's another story. But I think if we're actually serious about it, then I do think size matters. And I think that it doesn't mean that he didn't want to see that happening all over the place. And of course, in Acts, it began in church, in people's homes, and it grew very quickly. They had lived with Jesus for 3 years, and he had modeled this, and he said, "Do as I have done." And so they went out and they, found people and trained them up, and they had their little communities in all, and the fires started to light all over the world. And I think it's the same for us, that while we might want to be part of a bigger thing, every now and then, or if that has, whatever. But I think the true sense of discipleship, belonging, family, and feeling like, that what we've talked about, then I actually think that then size matters. And once you get to, 70, 80, then I think that it gets harder and harder to be really truly known. It's just too easy to walk in and walk out and no one actually really know you. And so it can be done on a bigger scale, but it has to be done, and that's where the small group movement came from, obviously. But I still think that it's not. I would rather use Roberto's language, flip the classroom and spend most of our time in small groups and then every now and then come together and celebrate. Because I just think it's the small spaces, whether it's 30, 40, 50, 10, 20, whatever those kind of, groups, and you get to kind of about 80, then you can do some stuff within the wider community, but you go beyond then and people get lost and people feel like they don't, and they're not seen and they don't feel like they've got something they can offer. And I think we've just missed the concept of the body. I think we've missed the concept of family. I mean, they're very rich images that have been given to us in the New Testament for that reason. Even right through the Old Testament, you can see it's these tribes of people who were, God really raised up to do certain things. So yes, the easy answer is yes, size matters. The hard thing is that I know that's very affronting for a lot of people. And yet, if you ask anyone where it is that they've either grown the most or whether they've felt like they've really connected or what keeps them connected, it's interesting to see during COVID, where people felt the most isolated and the church really struggled, these 14 churches, when I asked the question how they felt during COVID, they all said that they went to another level of connectedness. So in the midst of the churches that are feeling disconnected because you just went online and listened to someone talk and then you in your pajamas and then you went off and did your own thing. These communities were actually really deeply connecting because they already had those connections, and those connections actually got them through a really hard time that the world was going through and actually went to another level of deepened connectedness. See, that, to me, the beautiful thing about this is that this connectedness relationship, it's actually about getting through not only the good times but the hard times and actually feeling like we're in this together. That says something about size and says something about these communities and how intentional they were to actually do this together.
So we've talked about size, and I think if some people might be like, oh, yeah, okay, I know what we're talking about now. We're talking about small group. I mean, I was part of sort of Cell Church, Cell and Celebration, the big and the small. But there's something about this that is intergenerational. So even in a church, a church could be in the traditional sort of siloed sort of children in their small group, youth in their small group, adults in their small group. So that is, people are known and belonging and feeling that discipleship thing. So that addresses some of this circle leadership or some of this sort of sense of connection and having your voice heard. I mean, I'll be honest, being in an intergenerational small group is harder. You have different attention spans, very different interests. You have the challenges of parents and children and their willingness to be vulnerable about the real things in their life in front of each other, not wanting to burden each other. There's hard things about being in intergenerational spaces. It has to not be about you and getting your needs met all the time. And that is a maturity thing. And if you've got lots of younger people, it can default to them being louder or more needy. But I guess what I don't want people to go away thinking you're saying is that the key is small groups. I think that is part of small or being known in situations where you can hear other voices and collaborate is a huge part of it. But it's not just about the number of people. There is something about this intergenerational thing. So, yeah, help me come back to how are these intergenerational communities flourishing through this circle leadership that is different from it just being lots of small groups.
And I think the other thing is you need to unpack in that is that I think when we say small groups, we think of a small Bible study. Yeah. And again, we're going back to the head knowledge stuff. So let's go back, let's widen this out to holistic. Like, when we get together as a family and we have a meal together and we play together and we go out and pick rubbish because we're helping because the community needs rubbish or we're serving. So there's so many ways that we can be doing things as family or across the generations. Sorry, I just dropped my headpiece. And I think that we're still so focused on the intellectual teaching piece, which can be hard at times, and even relationship wise, there's times when it's really okay to, this is why I talked about flip the classroom. Imagine if, so often we think that the sacred cow is that Sunday mornings we have to go and sit and sing some songs, sorry, I'm saying really cynical here, listen to a 40-minute sermon and give our offering and read or pray together. And that also has to be all based and separate. And then, but to me, it's like, what would it look like to actually get together and truly celebrate across the ages? We can actually do that more together than we think. And I've done it for 18 years with all ages. So I suppose it's just a world I just don't even consider why it's so hard. And then it means that if then during the week you have, which is what we did, we had groups where we had kids homework clubs, and we had men's sheds where men over 50 made things, and we had U3A where people of the third age were learning, and small groups in homes. And so we were working, and we had mission groups that were doing different things. So things were happening throughout the week, but when we got together on the weekend, we actually came to celebrate all those things. And that was so beautiful to do together. It made sense because it's not like we have to go to church to learn the Bible. I mean, everyone's got 5 apps. Everyone's got access to any great speaker they can. What we do need to come together to do is to actually feel that we're part of something bigger, that God is to be honored, that around, and for us it was always around food, it was always around, the creative arts and music, and they're all beautiful levelers for every age to be a part of. So I suppose for me, one, I would say, what are we willing to flip that and go, we can do this differently? But two, when we're talking about small groups, meaning a group of people that truly know me, it can be much more than just sitting down and opening the Bible and having a Bible and reading the Bible together. But even then, when you open the Bible and do like Discovery Bible Method, where you read something and everyone shares what they're seeing, to be honest, across the ages, except under 3s, under 5s, we've just found we've had some of the most profound conversations with all ages together because their perspectives are so different, their experience is so different, their relationships. Like my kids grew up with, a whole lot of aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas that they absolutely adored. And my daughter, even at, 9 and 10, would say, when Ruth, who was at the time about 70 years old, when Ruth speaks, I never want her to stop. She has so much wisdom. And I love that. There's another lady that whenever she prays, she cries because she loves God so much. And it just brings us all to tears because you've got this woman who just is this beautiful, prayerful, who loves God so much that she, that just oozes out of her prayers, and it affects us all. And so our kids just grew up going, I don't want to be anywhere else because this is where I'm actually learning from wisdom. And then then those wise people are coming and saying to the kids how much they love and value their perspective when they read that and say, well, what do you see? So I think I've just thrown on now a couple of different angles. One is that it's not always about Bible study. Two, actually, when the relationship is deep, what we can learn together is probably would surprise people. And then when we gather, because we need to ask the question in our mindset, why are we doing it, how we're doing it? And actually, is there ways that we're missing out on in terms of the family feel or the sense of community. We cannot be a body if we're just all one arm. And that's what we've done. We've said, well, the arms go over there, the legs go over there, the heads go over there, you know, and the squishy bits that we don't really like, you go over there, and then everyone's happy. And actually, that's not. And it is a bit about what you said. It does actually teach us that it's not about us. It teaches us acceptance. It teaches us patience, grace, listening, difference, celebration, difference. And boy, I just don't know a better time in the world when we need to be more like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Our world does not teach that. That is a skill that is sorely missing. And church is an incredible opportunity to be around people that you would not normally cross paths with, people who think differently, vote differently, come from different places. The diversity in the church is such a gift, but it does require humility, acceptance, willingness to make it not about you. And those are skills that we have to learn. They're things that Jesus is discipling in us. I don't think they're natural. I mean, maybe there's arguments that children are quite accepting, but it seems that our default as humans is we like things that are just like us and don't require us to make many mental jumps. And so it does, I think that learning the empathy and the perspective taking is so, so important.
Oh, totally. And I saw that over again.
Go on.
I just saw it over and over again. I think one of my greatest joys was sitting down with all these people and listening to their stories and hearing the difference that other people had made, different generations had made in their lives, and how they just would not be anywhere else because it was just such it given them such life. And it was just so beautiful to hear. And I just thought, why wouldn't you want to be a part of a community like that?
I think people do.
Anyway.
I think that's why Gen Z is flocking to church. They want things from other generations that have stood the test of time and are still trusting in God. I wonder if we can kind of land this by coming back to leadership. So your research was all about what ways we lead that help these intergenerational communities flourish. And we've sort of explored the idea that maybe this leadership is not what we were raised with, or is not the sort of default leadership that is taught in Christian conferences. What is this sort of brave form of leadership? What are the skills or the techniques or maybe it's the attitudes that we need to take on as leaders to facilitate this kind of intergenerational church, intergenerational spaces where everybody's heard and feels like they can belong?
Yeah, I think that to be a leader, that is about servanthood and collaboration and inclusivity and not needing to win the argument, but to how to walk with. Again, I just think that's what we all should be. So, but to lead by example, we need to do that. I think what I found was we often think that's something new that we have to do, but the trouble is we need to actually unlearn some stuff. So often I will ask when people will say, but we need to do that. Why? Keep asking the question, why? And you keep unpacking, and you kind of go, okay. So I think that there's more unlearning needs to be done than learning, and that as leaders to really be brave enough to see that it is not always, that it's not necessarily about control, and it's not about, my way, but it's actually about how do I be the facilitator, the walking with, the alongside, the shepherd, the servant. I mean, the last things that Jesus did when before he was leaving, was he washed everyone's feet and said, really, this is what I'm asking you to do. So it is a servant leadership. I know we've talked about that. Surely ministers have talked about that. The beautiful example that he gave, and that's the kind of people that we want to be. So maybe that's brave. I just think that is our mantra: is how do we live like Jesus did? I mean, as Jesus was their rabbi and followed them. Really, that was the call. It's like to live as he did, to do as he did, and to carry on and become like him. So to me, if that's brave, I think that is brave, because it's upside down leadership. It's servant leadership. It's countercultural. But I also think that it is not only what desperately the world needs today, even if it's not something that people are going to really respect, it's actually the way Jesus led. So that is what he's called us to do. And so for me, it is about that, but it's also then as that kind of facilitator, it's about creating safe environments, not only for the community, but just even for those that are coming in, and learning to celebrate the good things. And for me, there's some things that came up that helped people make those transitions. But I think what I firstly found for these leaders is we've got to ask the hard question in ourselves. One, the sad thing is that if leaders actually look through the 7 elements of belonging and actually say they don't feel like they belong, it's really hard to lead people where you have not been. And leadership's a pretty lonely place with this kind of ladder leadership that says, I've got to have all the right answers. I've got to always know. I've got to have the vision. I've got to, do all this kind of thing. And I loved things that came out of some of these leaders that would say things like, if it's all about me, we're in trouble. And I don't always know what's going on, but I'm really happy to, go on this journey and to do what God's called me and to be open. I'm just trying to grab some of the wonderful sayings that came out of other people. It's like, this is the kind of humility I came across. Pastors saying things like, as tempting as it is for me to sprout knowledge because I am knowledgeable, it's still a mystery to me that for decades we still think that listening to a sermon is a good way to learn. This is what these pastors were saying. He was saying, I've picked up the message and I'm studied, so therefore everyone should listen to me. Model is flawed and broken. I just was amazed at these leaders that were vulnerable enough to say, actually, I think I spend, I could either spend all week preparing a sermon and then and then vomit on everyone about what I know, or I could take the passage, open it up and say, what can we learn together? And let's go on the journey and see what God says. And he says, and since I changed and started doing that, we as a community have just grown in such beautiful ways that I've changed everything that I do. So you can see this humility, this, I'm a shepherd, I want to, I want to bring my gifts, but I also acknowledge there's other gifts in the space, and we're all better for it when the body functions well together. And for me, I suppose that sounds brave. For me, I just think I think it's exciting. Yeah. I think it's wonderful. I think it's freeing for me because I don't need to have it all together, but I just know I need to be faithful where God's called me, and then actually be faithful and trust that God's actually got a whole lot of other people in the body that we're walking together in that actually bring some beautiful gifts, and we're richer all for it. So I have found it a very freeing and wonderful privilege to serve in that way. And when I spoke to these leaders, I found that they had that heart stance. And that heart stance was just a beautiful place for people to be part of.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, Tammy, where can people find out more? Where can they read your book, read your thesis? How can they follow along on this journey with you?
Well, my thesis is just about to be kind of the big red seal going onto it. So it's all very, very fresh. And my plan is to, according to my supervisor, he thinks I should be writing a book about it, which I probably will. So at the moment, really, through intergenerate.com.au, the podcasts that we have and some of the resources there and the conversations at the beginning, that's a good start, a place to start. And then, I suppose, hopefully I'll be over in the UK and be graduating as a doctor in 2026, and maybe then I might have more information about where you can get stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Preston, we look forward to welcoming you to the UK.
Oh, there you go.
Amazing.
You're
No,
prophesying.
yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, Tammy. We'll put links in the show notes to the Australia Intergenerate podcast. And I know you can people can buy your book there. And I'm sure when this comes out, they can buy the new book and find out more. But thank you so much for researching this, for your journey with this. I know it has served you, this journey, and you've learned a lot. But I think your learning will serve other churches. And I know I have been mulling over this topic of how do we lead and different models of leadership for a while after talking to you. So thank you for that. And thank you for how you're provoking us. And I love that what could be mindset that you said you have. And I think that's a gift to us in the church, that what could be, you're dreaming with God. So thank you for taking risks and dreaming with him. It's been good.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to connect with you.
Tammy has written an article as part of a 6-part series on intergenerational ministry for Roots. You can find them all on the Roots website. Links to Tammy's article, her Intergenerate Australia New Zealand podcast, and her book are all in the show notes. Roots exists to help you lead great church that's growing, relevant, engaging, authentic, and together. We've got Bible-based resources to help you explore the Bible together, intergenerationally, ask questions, convene conversations, host small groups, and create invitational missional events. Head to rootsforchurches.com to take a free trial and explore our wealth of resource, available for a very affordable annual subscription. You can explore a digital subscription or add-on or stunning full-colour magazines that help you prepare and share offline. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with leaders in your church and network, and leave us a review, as that helps others find it. Together, we can grow.